Welcome, everybody. I'm Kerravala from ZK Research, and welcome to another episode of What's New in Security with Will Townsend, with Lone Star Advisory and Research.
Yeah, I'm excited to be a newly minted independent. Spent
Yeah,
nearly 10 years with more insights and strategy, but yeah, looking forward to the new year and a new opportunity.
yeah, and just a little bit on the firm, like what are you gonna be covering? What gap you filling?
Yeah, so like the usual suspects, so obviously networking, cybersecurity, telecommunications, but I will be launching an optical networking practice this year. I mean, just given the demands of modern I felt it was important. I'm going to focus in three areas. I'm going to focus on the underlying semiconductors, obviously the infrastructure that powers all of this, as well as the services that flow off of it. So super excited to start that new practice area.
Yeah, well, it's certainly a burgeoning area, and it's funny optical. It's been here to stay for a long time, and it's here to stay for the foreseeable future. So
For sure.
now in this segment, we normally cover recent news, and given we came out of the holidays, it's the start of the year. I'm actually in Davos at the World Economic Forum. There hasn't been a ton of security news as companies are starting to ramp up their roadmaps for the year. So we're going to do some predictions,
Yeah.
and here's some things we've been thinking about. And so, Will, why don't you lead us off with prediction number one?
Yeah, so prediction number one kind of echoes back to something that I wrote up when I attended Black Hat back in August. And at that time, after the event, I kind of, sat back and sort of looked at, all the meetings that I had and all the discussions that occurred. And what really stood out for me was enterprise browsers and their importance, certainly with respect to modern AI, generative, agentic, and that sort of thing. I called, 2025 the year of the enterprise browser, but we're beginning to see is that that's morphing from, what we've all known to be, sort of the basic features of enterprise browsers into more of the AI browser. So in that Black Hat Forbes article, I looked at Google, looked at Island, a startup Mammoth Cyber, and Palo Alto Networks with its Prisma Access browser. And but what's been happening is an evolution where these new classes of browsers are ingesting real-time business context. We're going to talk about zero trust, I know, with your topic Z as well, but data loss protection, unsanctioned AI application blocking, and prompt injection mitigation. And this is using runtime security controls within the browser itself. And just recently, January 13th, CrowdStrike announced the fact that they were acquiring
Yep.
yeah, security, and they intend to merge it with their Falcon endpoint telemetry and threat intel. And what this acquisition brings CrowdStrike is what they're calling a continuous authorization technology that's going to basically create a security fabric, and it's an agentless approach in doing all of that. And so, this recent news from CrowdStrike just sort of reemphasizes, I think, the importance of what we're going to see with enterprise browsers morphing into more AI purpose-built browsers. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's something I've been looking at for a while. Menlo Security is another one in the space. And
Yeah.
I remember talking to them a couple of years about this, where the first time I met with them, I said, we've had enterprise browsers for a long time, never really caught on. But the big deal there was that it actually runs on Chromium now, right? So
Hmm.
before the early days of enterprise browser, you had to run in this special version of a browser, and everybody wanted to use Chrome. So lo and behold, nobody used it. And I think,
Yeah.
also, I think, we've had a lot more movement towards SaaS apps. And so today, the
Yeah.
browser is actually not just a window to the internet, but indeed like the operating system of the internet. And so I think I read somewhere
Yeah.
85% of workflows now happen in a tab in a browser.
Hmm.
And just consumer browsers don't really, um, have the capabilities. And I know some of the interesting things now is, in a browser, some of the vendors, I saw this actually at the Menlo booth at RSA, they're able to use AI to be able to scan the page, and they can detect that it's phishing in the browser,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
there's a lot of cool capabilities like that come in. And so I think, to me, the browser has always been the first point of contact the user has with, things from the internet, including malware and spyware and phishing
Hmm.
attacks and things. So the more you can find in the browser, the less your systems on the back end have to do,
Yeah.
right? So it always made sense that that would have that. And so I think with all the phishing and things growing, it certainly makes a lot of sense to do that. And with all the shadow AI coming as well, I think
Hmm.
the browser is the best place to do that kind of security as well. So, but
Yeah,
that's a
and
good one.
it's the stats, that I read, around, the delivery of malware. I mean, DNS is leveraged to do this, and to your point, the browser is becoming the interface to applications,
Yeah,
and providing another layer of protection within the browser is just super important. And you mentioned Chromium, and that was an inhibitor, having to use like these discrete sort of bespoke, type solutions, but based on Chrome, you're able to be able to manage things, I think a lot more easily. And Google offers an enterprise version of the Chrome browser, but
yeah,
I'd like to see Google really improve on what they're doing, because these other companies that I mentioned, like Palo Alto Networks and Mammoth Cyber, they're doing things like ingesting, business context to steer policy and just provide, just a higher level of protection from my perspective.
yeah. Well, Google does what Google does. They have a
Yeah,
version that's kind of good enough, but then if you want really good security, you got to go to a third party. So,
for
but
sure.
yeah, no, certainly um, this is not your father's enterprise browser. So
Yeah.
I think that's a good one. All right. Well, my first prediction is right on the concept that I think enterprises start to believe or understand that AI can only be secured using a true zero trust architecture. And I think this includes obviously agentic AI, in which we have all these agents popping up that can be running on a corporate network or not, right? You think in the retail use case, but also physical AI. And if you
Mhm.
think of what Zscaler's been doing with their mobile SIM, being able to
Yeah.
secure IoT devices, and so we're going to have a lot more AI, both agentic and physical. In fact, if you believe in the wisdom of Jensen, right, every keynote I've seen him do for the last year and a half has talked about the wave of physical AI coming, and that's everything from connected robots to autonomous vehicles to even things like the remote vacuums, autonomous vacuums in
Yeah.
companies, in buildings and things like that. So everything's being connected, and we need to secure it. I think trying to do that with firewalls it's impossible. Even if you had unlimited budget, you just couldn't put a firewall enforcement point at between all these different devices and agentic agents. And so to me, the easiest way to do that is with zero trust. Now, there's a lot of things called zero trust out there. And so buyers have to be careful to make sure that it's
Yeah.
actually a true zero trust architecture that's being sent back through a proxy versus something that's done more as a that's really just VPN on steroids,
Right.
right? And so, your thoughts on that prediction?
Yeah, no, I think it's a solid prediction. I mean, when you look at the estimates, of non-human agents and the proliferation that's expected, to your point, traditional, architectures and approaches just do not scale. So at a very high level, you're going to have to, have the scalability, the permissioning, and that's a segue to my next topic. I want to talk a little
Yeah,
bit about identity, but managing the identity of these agents as well, and employing zero trust. And to your point, there's so much whitewashing that goes on with zero trust, and there's a sort of a spectrum or a scale of how true a zero trust architecture is as it's marketed by a particular infrastructure provider. But no, I think it's a solid prediction, and more needs to be done there.
yeah. Well, why don't you go into your next prediction? Because I do
Yeah.
think if you're going to be talking about identity, I think in 2026 I saw that machine and agentic identities outnumber human users by an estimated 100 to 1. So if you're having
Yeah.
trouble managing the users on your environment today, just wait a
Right.
year.
No, yeah, I mean, good luck with that. And so, I'm going to talk a little bit more about Cisco, but I'm going to talk about Palo Alto Networks as well. So late last year, I did have an opportunity to sit down with the Cisco Duo leadership team. And at that time, they had announced a report, a security report on identity. And it's no surprise, the weaponization of AI tools is presenting just, tremendous challenges, just, from a sophistication and a scale perspective, getting back to the point that you made there. And what I really like about what Cisco is doing, they've done it through acquisition. Certainly, Dio is an acquisition, but they've also acquired other companies over the years to bolster what they're doing with identity. But they're integrating that Dio capability with Talos, so Cisco's threat intel, including Cisco's capabilities with email and DNS security. And let's not forget about observability. So this is an area that you and I have talked about, quite a bit over the years through acquisition. When you look at Thousand Eyes, AppD, that sort of thing, Cisco is really sort of doubling down, with observability. And when you look at all of that in aggregate, it provides a very, very deep and broad ability to combat, the threats against identity, with respect to session hacking and stealing credentials and that sort of thing. And, traditionally, the other challenge with identity access management is it's been fragmented. And it's something that both Cisco and Palo Alto Networks, with, Palo's, intent to acquire CyberArk, that they want to solve with a platform approach. And so I don't want to share any more details because I'm going to be publishing a research note on lonestar-ar.com, but would like to get your perspective, Z, on all of that. Do you agree?
Oh yeah. Well, see, the problem is that traditional IAM was really built for humans who
Yep.
log in, they work 8 hours a day, they log out and go home, right? AI agents are a lot more ephemeral in nature. They may exist for only 30 seconds to perform a single task, or they might last 30 hours. But even in that 30 seconds, they require privileged access to sensitive data to be effective, right? And so
Hmm.
if and it's interesting too, because if you try and do these things manually, the 30 seconds is too short, but it's not short enough to be breached, right?
Right.
So I think that IAM must transition to some sort of machine first governance model capable of issuing, monitoring, and revoking, all these different identities at machine speed. I think the
Hmm.
other big change too, Will, is that deep fakes have erased visual trust. So we're in the era where seeing isn't necessarily believing. And so real
Believing,
time,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. So real time AI deepfakes now bypass legacy biometrics and they can trick human administrators. You hear this all the time about people who sent money because they got a video from their boss telling them to do so.
Yeah.
And so I think reimagining IAM means moving towards, being able to get rid of traditional biometrics and things and not just checking who you are,
Yeah.
but at a system level, continually analyze how you interact and doing all that pattern recognition. So I don't think the traditional IAMs really were ever built for an era where we have all these agents popping up and doing all these tasks and stuff. So it's a good prediction, and I think it's something that's frankly long overdue because I think traditional IAM solutions have really run their course, for the way we work today.
Yeah, and I think, and you read about all the different integrations, companies integrate with other companies, and that's great. But, I think, the company that figures out how to do this and not introduce friction, because if you think about it, oftentimes MFA and, on all these different measures introduce friction, users get frustrated and they turn it off or they try to turn it off. And so, I think, those organizations, I think Cisco has a solid, strategy here. It's going to be really interesting to see, as Palo Alto Networks comes together with CyberArk, if that deal is approved, which I
Yeah.
expect it probably will be, how that all comes together. But at the end of the day, you got to make it easy for users, or it's pointless.
Yeah, and there are a number of pure plays, one password, things like that have been working
Yeah,
on this problem. So, I think there's room for both the pure plays and the platform plays, but clearly platform is the way forward. But I do think that, and the reason for that is that the data that you see in the network can help educate the IAM solution as to whether that's a real person or not, right? So, or
yeah,
an authorized agent. So,
for
yeah,
sure.
that'll be interesting to watch. And so, my second prediction is that secure networking, which is something we've talked about for a long time,
Yeah,
actually becomes real, not just technically, right? There's a lot of security and networking vendors,
yeah.
but also operationally as SecOps and NetOps teams come together. In fact, I ran a survey at the second half of last year, and 83% of network engineers said now they have security as at least part of their remit. So I'm not
Yeah.
saying if you go to these big enterprises, they're not going to have completely siloed, SecOps and NetOps teams. That'll be the last group to fall. But once you
Right.
get down below that into the mid-market, small companies, they are bringing the security and network and operations teams together because it just makes sense to. And so much of security forensics today is done through network information.
Yeah.
And I think the vendor community has responded, right? Like Palo Alto, Fortinet, historically big. You think of them as big S. Now they've added the N, right? Companies like
Yeah.
Cisco. Well, Cisco's always been a little bit of both, but even the other network vendors, Extreme Networks, Arista, companies like that have added security as an adjacency. And so this convergence of security and networking is happening, right? Juniper is another one. And so,
Yeah.
I guess we'll see how this plays out, but clearly I think this concept of platformization of security and networking, they're coming together and they're creating one secure networking platform.
Yeah, and it's smart, for the vendors that have been traditionally focused in networking. And yeah, I would argue that, Cisco dabbled in security, but now it's front and center. G2 Patel has been driving that, basically owning, all of product, within Cisco. But it makes sense when you integrate security into the connectivity layer.
Yeah.
You get certain benefits. And then, when you look at, network observability, getting back to that, you know, these solutions do a lot to ensure assurance and high availability and that sort of thing, but they can also surface telemetry that's critically important in identifying security gaps and that sort of thing. So I agree. There have been some companies that have been focused on one versus the other. But my prediction is at the end of the day, those infrastructure providers that pay equal homage to both, networking and security are the ones that are going to reap the rewards, from a sales perspective and a profitability perspective. And that's certainly where I also see the market going, is like that convergence to simplify it. I mean, to your point, you're a former IT practitioner, right? And it's like it's this division of church and state when you look at NetOps and SecOps, but I'm also seeing momentum moving towards, blending the two. And honestly, like smaller organizations don't typically have a sophisticated security, focus, right? And so a lot of it is outsourced, a lot of it is, they don't have, the acumen and the tribal knowledge to manage that. But what I like from Palo Alto Network, Cisco, and certainly Fortinet is that they're bringing that together, and it's going to deliver better security outcomes and better network connectivity experiences, I believe, long term. So
Here in Davos, I'm with Helmut Reisinger, the CEO of EMEA for Palo Alto, and he was saying that they have data that shows that the time to data exfiltration has shrunk from 22 days to just a couple hours, right? And
yeah,
that's some of the data that Palo has. And so, how do you solve that? Well, you need to be able to see that data moving out of the network and out of the network, right? And so it's not just security telemetry; it's also network telemetry. And you bring up the observability point you made was a good one too, because if you think about observability and security, they're two sides of the same coin.
yeah,
It's the same data being used, just one is used for cyber, and the other case is used to see if applications are performing well. But there's no
yeah.
reason why you shouldn't be bringing those two things together. So these domains are converging, and I think that's there'll be some operational bumps along the way as companies figure things out. But ultimately, to your point, they're going to get better outcomes.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Well, great. Well, enjoy your time in Davos. Like,
yeah,
go build a snowman.
yeah, yeah,
Have some
yeah,
Swiss
and
chocolate.
yeah, and then even after this, we got some events coming up, right? We got RSA's coming, Mobile World
Yeah,
Congress is coming, so
yeah.
it's interesting because at every MWC there's a big security presence, and every RSA there's a big network presence to support our point.
Now, I wonder though, is NVIDIA and Jensen, is that team going to take over RSA conference and MWC like they just did at CES? Because you're at CES, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting that outside of consumer though, when you go to some other events, NVIDIA doesn't generally have a big presence. They become part of every other booth. And I think part of that is an understanding from NVIDIA that they don't really have a channel to sell directly to enterprises. So
Yeah,
they'll be in the Cisco booth, the Dell booth, things like that, right?
yeah, yeah.
They'll be partnered up with Amazon, things like that. And so, but clearly you're seeing a lot more NVIDIA and a lot more booths and a lot more shows. So that's
Mhm.
it's an NVIDIA driven world. So anyways, to recap, our predictions are enterprise browsers morph into AI browsers. Enterprises begin to realize that the only way you can secure AI is with zero trust. The need for a reimagined IAM platform to keep pace with the new AI threats is coming. You'll have a research note on that. And
Yeah.
then lastly, secure networking becomes real.
Good
Yeah.
stuff, my friend.
Yeah.
It's always
All
good to
right.
chat security.
Yeah. And so that wraps up this episode of What's New in Security. I guess we'll see at the end of the year if our predictions came true. I'll include a link to Lone Star AR, though, in the comments below. All right. Anything else you want to add?
No, that's good.
All right. So on behalf of Will Townsend, we'll see you next time on another episode of What's New in Security.